All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. This is going to be a very, very exciting video. I've been highly anticipating making this Meta Monday because it's the first tournament, the first Monday here after the first large tournament of the new A4 season. It's super, super exciting. This is going to be a very long video, so, buckle up, get some snacks, and sit down, and hopefully, this video is interesting to you guys. There will be timestamps down below, so feel free to use them. We usually start off these videos by taking a look at the final standings, talking about them, and then going into the deck lists, and then towards the end of the video, we go into the metagame tab, and we crunch all of the numbers and all of the data, and we kind of use that to, provide context for all of the information that we showed earlier in the video. You guys know how it is by now, but definitely comment down below. I would love to hear your guys' opinions about everything that we talk about in this video. But like I said, there's a lot to go over, and I'm actually really, really excited about it. So let's sort of dive right in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you, by the way, for 30,000 subscribers. Super, super cool. All right, so the Ursa Days Pocket Weekly number 37 actually had, I think, about 900 players competing, which is really impressive when you kind of, figure that it's the beginning of a ranked season. And of course, Pokemon Pocket's been around for like 8-9 months now. Very, very incredible. A super healthy tournament scene. And honestly, just such a great job from Ursa and everybody else that sort of runs this tournament series. If there is anybody else, I don't know. But anyway, big shout out to everyone involved. Let's take a look here at the final standings. And again, guys, one thing I always say is don't overreact to the standings, right? Because they don't mean everything. But anyway, let's get right into it, guys. Let's see what it is. Who won this week? What did well? And yeah, there we go, guys. So yeah, Giratina Darkrai, first place. Who would have thought, I mean, come on now. I mean, is that a big surprise at this point? Listen, I know the comment section is going to go crazy. They're going to be like, well, new metagame, nothing's changed. Giratina Darkrai is still the best deck. There's more to it than that. There's more context. There's more information for us to go over. But yes, Giratina Darkrai did get first place. It also got 8th place, 9th place, and 11th place. So it's not like it completely dominated the standings here, but it did go 12-1-1. Luffy here from Brazil did get first place, Giratina, playing Giratina and Darkrai. Is that a surprise? Well, realistically, early on in formats, in when seasons sort of, open up, Giratina Darkrai is actually typically the best choice just because it's tried, it's proven, it's consistent, and people aren't really counterplaying it, especially when new cards come out. So it was also the #1 most played deck this weekend. So if I'm being entirely honest with you, I am not surprised that Giratina and Darkrai was the deck that got first place, but a lot of the other stuff in the standings is actually kind of surprising. Let's break it all down here. In second place, Sekiro from the United States, one of the best Pocket players in the world in my mind, went 11-2-1 playing Espeon and Sylveon. We did make a video a couple of days ago saying that, or I was saying that Espeon was actually probably the new best deck to be playing for ranked mode. I still kind of feel that way. Second place here, very, very good standings, or I guess placement for Espeon. It also got 12th place down here. This is even more impressive when we take a look at the metagame later, because Espeon wasn't even like a top 6 or 7 most played deck. I think it was like 8th or 9th in terms of its popularity this weekend, which is really impressive for it to go all the way to the finals. Third place here, we have Silvally, Zeraora, so Turbo Silvally, and then at 4th place here, we have Silvally and Oricorio. These are two different deck lists. We'll break them down. But yes, Silvally, of course, also one of the decks that's very tested and proven. Oricorio, always as well, really strong early in the seasons here. Again, people don't really counterplay Oricorio that much. Definitely one of the stronger decks in the game. I've been saying this the last few days, so honestly, no surprise, Silvally and Zeraora and Oricorio here in 3rd and 4th place. And then we also have Flareon and Leafeon here at 5th place, which is a decent surprise, but we'll get into this. I actually think that Flareon Leafeon was a really strong meta call considering the decks that people played this weekend, which is pretty cool. Guzzlord in Naganadel at 6th place here. A lot of people are going to be interested in this deck list. We'll break it down in a little bit. Another Flareon deck here at 7th place. So again, a really good weekend here for Flareon and Leafeon. One of the better decks of last format, but nothing that ever sort of got to grand finals, I don't believe, but it was a consistently good choice last season. Giratina Darkrai again. Giratina Darkrai again. Shout out to Eternal and Yoji and really all of these players, honestly. And then here we actually have a Darkrai in Silvally deck here in 10th place. This is going to be a very, very interesting deck list, which we'll break down here in a little bit. More Giratina Darkrai. Again, here's that Espeon. More Silvally or Oricorio. We're kind of seeing a trend here. But also, if we go down, we see a ton of Buzzwole, right? A bunch of these players went 8 wins, 3 losses, 8-1-1 right down here, 8-2. But I think Buzzwole was actually the second most played deck this weekend, which is also quite interesting. But again, it kind of makes sense. Buzzwole, it's proven a lot of times in the early season, people aren't, they're either really infatuated with playing some of the new decks, which again, a lot of the early deck lists are, not super optimized, and then they aren't necessarily seeing play for any specific reason because people don't really know the matchup spreads for the decks. But things like Buzzwole and Giratina and Darkrai, they're proven, people understand them, they know that they're consistent and that they're good. So Buzzwole was actually also a really strong choice this weekend, and it was also the second most played deck. So Buzzwole here at 14th, 15th, Charizard here at 16th. Not many people played Charizard this weekend, I will say that, but there was a Charizard here in top 16. More Buzzwole, Giratina, Darkrai, and then Snorlax and Ho-Oh here at 20th place, the highest placement for any Ho-Oh deck. This is a really interesting list. We'll break it down soon. And then here's the first Crobat, right? So what about Crobat EX, guys? I know a lot of people were talking about Crobat. I made a video saying it was the new strongest archetype. In fact, I still believe that. I will die on that hill. Crobat is incredibly powerful, but only 22nd place, right? So what happened to all the other Crobats? Did it do poorly this tournament? Again, we'll break it all down later. I will say that things that saw a lot of play, the most popular decks of this particular tournament were all decks that actually did quite well against Crobat. So probably one of the most heavily counterplayed decks in this first weekend, which is really interesting because it was just released. Arceus and Capu Koko, again, sort of a turbo lightning type build here instead of Silvally. It's EX Pokemon. More Silvally this time with Pichu, a bunch of Giratina Darkrai down here. And then as we go down, so sort of more the same, the first Sylveon and Greninja deck. So what a lot of people consider to be the top deck of the last format, all the way down here at 39th place, Minato. That is the highest placement for Greninja, Sylveon, and Giratina. I did talk about it, and I believe yesterday's video that I didn't believe that this was a very well-positioned deck in the metagame right now. There's also a Skarmory here at 32nd place. I don't want to miss that. Shout out to Skarmory. We'll break all of these decks down here soon. But yeah, Sylveon and Greninja, just not something that I think many people chose to play this weekend, but honestly, none of them did that well. Just a deck that I really don't think is that well positioned in the meta currently. So very interesting that the top deck of last format, its highest placement in the first tournament of this new format being 39th place, which is pretty cool. So yeah, anyway, guys, let's talk about the deck lists. Let's sort of dive right into it. And, we'll talk a little bit about the decks specifically, and then, of course, we'll go over why I think they did so well and what was, a good aspect of these decks. So the top placing Giratina and Darkrai deck, I don't think there's really going to be much of a surprise here. The only difference here between the other Giratina Darkrai decks that we've probably seen in previous weeks or previous months even is the inclusion of Silver. And I think that this deck list probably swapped out like a second Mars for Silver. I can't really particularly say something right off the top of my head. Maybe they cut like one potion. They added basically one extra slot. They cut something from the deck. Maybe it was Sabrina, because we don't see Sabrina in the list. So maybe they cut Sabrina to play Silver. And yeah, other than that, it's Giratina and Darkrai. So the thing with Giratina and Darkrai is that it actually does well against two of what I would consider the strongest archetypes or new archetypes that came out in this expansion, that being, of course, Crobat and Espeon. Not to say there's not counterplay to Giratina and Darkrai. Like I said, people just don't really choose to play counterplay very much to Giratina and Darkrai. But maybe the people playing Buzzwole did have that in mind because Buzzwole was the second most played deck, and Buzzwole is actually one of the few decks that always has a really good win rate against Giratina and Darkrai. But yeah, it's consistent. People are comfortable with it, and they know that they're going to probably have a decent chance to do well. I'm really not surprised, honestly, that it got first place. I mean, this is like a few days after a new set releases. A lot of the decks are suboptimal, and it was literally the most played deck this weekend. So I think the player base is kind of smartening up to the fact that early in the season, things like Giratina, Darkrai are strong choices. The deck list here, though, is really no surprise. One Silver. And now one thing I will say about Silver, and it's more so and it's about its sort of usefulness in certain decks, like decks that are playing 2 copies of Sylveon. I was very much underrating Silver before it came to the game. I know some people were really high on it. I thought it would be a good card, but I didn't think it would be nearly as useful as it was, or as it has been in my testing with it. The combination of red card and Silver is crazy, right? Even early in the game or late in the game, you can red card your opponent down to 3 cards, then play the Silver, remove a supporter card from their hand, effectively leaving them with a 2-card hand, a lot of times without any supporter cards, which is really, really strong in the early and in the late game. But the thing with Silver that I kind of just didn't really realize was how often during your turn that your opponent will win if they have a particular supporter card in their hand. I've had this experience so much playing Espeon and Sylveon and testing it over the last few days is that I know, like later in the game, I know that it's like, okay, listen, if my opponent has a Lily in their hand and they heal up their Crobat, I know I'm going to lose. Or if I know that they have a red card in their, or a red in their hand, that supporter card, they're going to play it and they're going to KO me and they're going to win next turn. Or if they have a Cyrus, I know I'm going to lose next turn. So Silver is really strong because oftentimes you know coming up next turn on your opponent's next turn that they will win if they have that conditional win condition supporter card. And Silver is really the only counterplay to that. Of course, we do have things like Mars, but the combination of Silver being able to not only see your opponent's hand, but pull out a specific supporter card is really, really strong. It's something I kind of underrated. I think Silver, especially in the late game, but also in the early game, is honestly one of the strongest disruptive cards in the entire game. I think it's actually really healthy for Pokemon Pocket. It allows you to kind of counterplay things that are otherwise sort of out of your control, and I think that's really healthy for the competitive aspect of Pokemon Pocket. Silver might be the most underrated card to come out in A4, and I honestly kind of do believe that. I know I always say I'm honest with you guys, but yeah, really surprised with Silver. Everything else, though, about Giratina Darkrai, I think is all really good. Of course, the PCL in here, double Rocky Helmet, all stuff really for Oricorio. One Mars, one Guzma, one Cyrus. One thing I will say, in my experience playing Espeon, is that the one copy of Guzma and Red is really dangerous. We actually saw that an Espeon player played Silver to try to counterplay against Giratina and Darkrai, and then when they looked at their opponent's hand, they had both their copy of Red and Guzma in their hand, which were both win conditions, and that was absolutely crazy. So I think the strength of Giratina Darkrai is that you can play so many supporter cards, and you could potentially have both Red and Guzma, which are both win conditions in kind of the same scenario, in your hand at one time. Really, really strong. But anyway, it's Giratina Darkrai, guys. Come on. I mean, you know, what are we talking about here? One of the best decks in the game currently, especially in early seasons, but definitely the GOAT of Pokemon Pocket. I mean, this is literally the best deck that we've ever had, and you can't really dispute that given its success for so long. I mean, it's Giratina Darkrai, guys. Absolutely insane. The second place deck, though, was Espeon and Sylveon. This was something that, again, I was really, really surprised by once I got my hands on with it and I started testing it, how consistent it is and how overwhelmingly powerful this deck is going second. 80 damage is nothing to be sort of, to scoff about, right? It 2-hit KOs so many Pokemon in the game, and it 1-hit KOs a lot of basic Pokemon. So when you're going second, not only can we heal a ton with double Espeons and EV Bag, but we can also just deal enough damage in the early game to put too much pressure on our opponent. Giant Cape's going to bring Espeon up to 160. That's out of range of getting KO'd by a lot of different things in the format. And as we see here, right, one Sabrina, one Cyrus, I think these are cards that you really kind of have to play in conjunction with each other in a lot of decks because they are the most consistent win condition supporter cards in the game, right? Gust is sort of the term for it. Gust cards are just so good, and I think that they really are probably the best supporter cards in Pokemon Pocket, other than things like Research. And then, again, as we see, one red card, one silver, this is how I am playing Espeon. I think that the combination of red card and silver in the early game or the late game oftentimes does win me games, which I think is really strong. The one interesting thing about this deck list that I've really noticed is that they're playing one copy of the small Sylveon EX, the non-EX, and the non-EX Espeon as well. I think that both of these cards have their merit. I think the idea of playing one copy of either of these cards, so playing like 6 total evolutions in the deck, the idea here was probably to sort of overcompensate for the inclusion of Oricorio in the tournament and making sure that we're not losing to that matchup. I don't know if it's really needed. The combination of Sylveon and Sabrina and Giant Cape usually is enough to sort of win those matchups. Espeon as well, if you get 2 Espeon EX on the field, you can actually survive forever against Oricorio, so you can almost force your opponent to go into a non-EX Pokemon anyway, or a non-Oricorio Pokemon anyway. So honestly, I don't think that matchup is that bad. I wouldn't say you need both copies of the non-EX Pokemon here, but they both are really strong in their own sense. A lot of times against the Oricorio decks, they're playing Zeraora, they're playing Pichu or baby Pokemon, so they have a bunch of energies on their board. Espeon oftentimes, especially when paired with EV Bag, will be able to take the KO on an Oricorio, and sometimes even a Silvally, which is really strong. It also does have more HP than Sylveon. The downside, though, to Espeon is that it's weak to Dark, so against things like Darkrai and Crobat, even with Giant Cape, you're probably not living very easily whatsoever. So keep that in mind. But yeah, Sylveon, the small one, even though it's 2 energies to attack instead of 1, that's definitely a big upside to this Espeon, is that it's a 1 energy attack cost, which is really clutch. But this Sylveon here can hit up to 140 damage, I believe it is. Maybe it's 130. I think it's 140. But with EV Bag, we oftentimes can use this, not even against Oricorio decks, just as the highest attacking option in our deck list to take when it KOs. Really, really powerful, honestly. So, my recommendation with Espeon would be to play a deck very much like this. I think the supporter count is perfect. 2 Research, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, 1 Silver, 1 red card, I think is correct. Personally, I feel like you could cut one of these Sylveons or one of these Espeons, whichever you prefer to cut, to play maybe an extra Eevee bag or an extra Giant Cape. I think that would, in general, make the deck a bit more consistent and a bit more streamlined. And yes, theoretically, it's not going to improve your Oricorio matchup, but I don't think this deck really struggles that much against Oricorio anyway. But there you go, guys, Espeon. And really impressive, honestly. A brand new archetype getting all the way to the grand finals. It did lose to Giratina Darkrai. And I will say that your matchups here against Giratina Darkrai aren't necessarily favorable. And against Crobat, it's not very favorable. But against almost everything else in the metagame, I feel like this deck does exceptionally well. So keep that in mind. I honestly think you can probably beat Crobat and Giratina Darkrai pretty often anyways, especially if you're going second. But yeah, that's my sort of 2 cents about Espeon. Really, really surprised by it. And when we take a look at the metagame tab, you'll see it was not nearly the most played deck of this tournament. So very impressive for it to get all the way to grand finals. Next up is going to be the Silvally Zeraora deck here in third place here. Wizard from Brazil went 10-2-1. Both of these Oricorio decks or Silvally decks are very similar, but they're actually sort of the two sides of the same coin, which is going to be really interesting to take a look at these deck lists. This is a very traditional deck. Again, the only main difference here, of course, is that we are playing one copy of Silver, which again indirectly kind of buffed Silvally, which is crazy. Because to me, I honestly thought this card was put into the game to counter Silvally, but it's probably as good of a card in Silvally as any other card in the deck list. But other than that, everything is very consistent, right? I mean, we're not even super reliant on the energy switching here. We're not even playing E-Switch, just one copy of Dawn. This is sort of the classic version, right? And it was the highest placing version in the tournament, but again, I think that it could just be because most people are familiar with this structure of the deck list, and I think that it's a very consistent deck in its own right. It's literally just Turbo Silvally. I mean, that's all this deck list is. It's just super fast paced. It's absolutely incredible going second. Silvally is just one of the best cards in the entire game, and I think it's been buffed by Silver. Not much I can really say about this list here. Very standard, very much traditional Silvally Zeraora, one copy of Oricorio. I think it has a lot of benefits. One copy of Oricorio is interesting. I know that if you play 2 copies of Oricorio, that's going to help you in some matchups. But in general, I don't think it's a good Pokemon to lead off with in game, so I don't think it's really... it makes sense to play 1 copy of Oricorio in my mind, but 2 copies is probably not bad whatsoever. The next deck list here, Darius Popek here from Poland is playing a much more interesting and kind of an updated version of Silvally Oricorio. And again, these players were both top 4. They both had the same record. So even though one is 3rd place and one's 4th place, these decks were literally tied in the standings, right? So they're the exact same sort of success in terms of the tournament. Here is the updated Silvally deck, which is very different, right? So this is Silvally and Oricorio, but we're not playing Zeraora. We're actually playing Pichu and Magby. One thing I'll just say right off the bat is it doesn't matter which baby Pokemon we're playing here. You could play Pichu or Magby or just 2 Pichu or 2 Magby. It doesn't really matter because we're playing Lightning Energies for the deck list, which means that, of course, with Oricorio, we're always able to attack. With Silvally, it's colorless anyway, so we're always able to attack. It doesn't really matter if we're playing Magby or Pichu, honestly. It just doesn't. So you could play 2 copies of either of these, and it wouldn't really matter. But anyway, the whole idea here is baby Pokemon are also really strong with Silvally. Some people are going to ask or comment, that they think that the baby Pokemon are underwhelming or that they aren't really taking over the metagame. I think baby Pokemon weren't overrated. I think they are exceptionally strong. I just think that a lot of people are playing classic deck lists, and there's certain decks that just don't play baby Pokemon. Things like decks that are playing Sylveon or Giratina. Those are decks that just don't need to play baby Pokemon. So for that reason, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. But what baby Pokemon did, or what they are doing, is allowing deck lists that aren't Giratina decks or aren't Sylveon decks to still be really strong, especially going first and have that going first option. And I think that's really healthy for the game. So you might not see baby Pokemon winning tournaments here or there, but I think that they're going to be really valuable to the overall structure of the competitive meta in Pokemon Pocket. So I think that they aren't overrated at all. In fact, I think that they're definitely really strong. But yeah, this Silvally deck is playing Pichu, Magby, and Oricorio instead of, Zeraora in Energy Switch, which, is a little bit different, right? So it kind of depends. It really is about preference, but I do think that this is a much better deck going first than the other Silvally deck. But going second, of course, it doesn't really matter that much because Pichu and Magby have free retreat. So I think there's certainly some merit and some upside to playing baby Pokemon with Silvally because they provide really inherent value going first. And it doesn't really matter if you're playing them going second because you can just retreat into anything. You know what I mean? So I like baby Pokemon. I think that they might pair best with Silvally, which again is really funny. Silvally just has been inherently buffed by so many other cards in this new expansion, which is really funny. 2 Gladion, 1 Giovanni, 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina, 1 Guzma, 1 Mars, and 1 Silver. So again, you're going to see a lot of Silver in the format. I think that it is just a incredibly useful card, probably one of the best disruptive cards in the entire game. And hand disruption right now in general is as good good as it ever has been. So I think that Silver has found a really nice place in the metagame. Might be honestly the most played card from this new format, which I think is really cool. But yeah, this version of Silvally is also really good. It kind of opens things up a little bit so we can play 2 copies of Oricorio, which I do like. Of course, leading Oricorio in some matchups isn't going to be that good, but, you know, what is it? 4 of our 6 Pokemon are strong leadoff options, so it's not very often where you are leading Oricorio when you don't want to. But anyway, there you go, the updated, or I guess a different flavor of Silvally. Again, a really, really strong deck. Next up, let's take a look here at Flareon and Leafeon and talk a little bit about why I believe this deck list is actually really well positioned in the metagame right now. Nothing has really changed here. This is almost a direct copy and paste. We're actually not even playing the Find a Friend EV. We're just playing a Draw a Card EV, which is interesting. But I honestly feel like it doesn't really matter that much. I would still think that Find a Friend EV would be, I guess, better than Draw a Card, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, this deck list was really, really strong against the 2 top decks that saw the most play of this tournament. That, of course, being Giratina, Darkrai, and Buzzwole, right? Those are 2 matchups where Flareon and Leafeon excels in. So it's not like this was a deck that saw a ton of play. I think it just saw maybe a little bit more success than you might expect because of its matchup spreads against the other decks that saw the most play this weekend, which, you know, was interesting, right? You never really expected that, but it just sort of ended up that way. Giratina, Darkrai, and Buzzwole, 2 of the most played decks, and then Flareon, Leafeon are kind of strong really against those 2 archetypes, which is a pretty unique example of where matchup spreads really are really, really important. But as far as decks go in the format, this has to be sort of a solid A-tier deck list. It has maybe S-tier potential depending on, you know, which decks sort of see more play. But one thing is for sure is that this deck is consistent, and again, it's really good against specific strategies, and I don't really expect this deck to go away anytime soon. It's not like it got first place this weekend, but a couple of players did place pretty high with it. I don't really have anything else to say. I will say that against some of the other new decks in the format, this particular archetype isn't like, you know, like super overwhelming. It's just it was a really decent call. And it ended up being just a really well-positioned deck this weekend. So nothing really bad to say about it. Nothing's really changed here, but I do think that Leafeon Flareon just ended up being really quite good here. One player here at 5th place, 10-1-1 is a really good record. And then another player here at 9-1-2. Next up, let's take a look at Magma Osama from Japan. And they were playing Guzzlord Naganadel, which I know some people are like, oh, Guzzlord, is this sort of a new Guzzlord deck? It's not. This is literally just aggro dark. Like, I know some people, like, the thing with Naganadel is that it doesn't, like, it's independent kind of from Guzzlord, right? So a lot of the Guzzlord decks that people were testing early in this format were playing Will, or they were playing Baby Pokemon or Darkrai. Like, they were really trying to use Guzzlord as a control deck. But what ended up being sort of the best option for Guzzlord in this tournament specifically was a really aggressive deck playing Naganadel, which again makes sense. Naganadel is really strong going first. It can KO things like Eevee with the poison and poison barb. It can in Nihilego, it can KO like Zubats. It can KO basically basic Pokemon, which are oftentimes in the active spot early in the game. And Poipole as well can actually KO baby Pokemon pretty consistently as well. It's really strong into Oricorio, so it's a great Oricorio counter. I just actually think that this sort of aggro dark deck with Naganadel ended up being probably the best sort of aggressive deck or dark type deck in the game right now for this weekend, which is really interesting. I don't think anybody really expected Naganadel to see a lot of play, and I think a lot of people were testing Guzzlord in other ways. So it just sort of ended up being that, you know, hyper aggressive decks like Naganadel here ended up just being quite good. And I think that's really cool. Honestly, we have Poison Barb, we have Nihilego, Guzzlord, so just really early damage, really early aggression. Only one Celesteela, which is interesting, but overall, yeah, just sort of a full poison aggro deck here with Guzzlord, which I just think it's actually pretty smart to play. Who I don't know if that was sort of a conscious decision by this Japanese player, but they ended up doing really well. One of the few people in this entire tournament that was playing a deck list like this, so really cool to see it, you know, sort of open up this season by having really good results, which I think is really cool. And again, that's sort of that's my opinions about this. I think that Naganadel really did kind of carry this deck pretty far into the tournament. I think that Guzzlord is a high roll card in general, but again, you know, 1 energy, 40 damage plus poison plus Nihilego on a stage 1 Pokemon, really good going first and second, honestly not bad at all. Just really hyper aggressive, and I think that probably, you know, benefited this deck to some degree pretty extensively. A lot of Pokemon and you know, the decks are actually weak to dark, like Espeon's weak to dark, Giratina's weak to dark, so I mean dark in general is a good type. This just ended up being kind of the top, I guess, you know, aggressive dark deck, which is pretty cool to see it get 6th place. Honestly, very, very impressive. Here's the second highest placing Flareon Leafeon deck from Pokecatcher. Again, excuse me, literally, I think the exact same. I don't know if anything was different here. This is playing the Find a Friend EV. So again, the differences are going to be minimal, but I would say that Find a Friend EV is probably better. But yeah, these EV-EX decks are actually pretty cool. Like there's a lot of scenarios where EV-EX can actually just KO a baby Pokemon on turn 1, going second, which is actually really strong. But also just the combination of going into EV hitting for 30 and then next turn doing 70 with Leafeon can KO with something like a Silvally when it evolves, right? So that sort of lines up really well. It just sort of ends up, EV-EX ends up being actually a lot better early in the game than it ever was. That 30 damage is actually really relevant right now, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that's basically the same deck list. Leafeon here can just kind of solo Oricorio, which is pretty cool. This deck list here can certainly get over Oricorio, but it's not something I would say is like phenomenally great in the matchup. Whereas like things like Espeon, Sylveon are probably a little bit better. In general, like if you had asked me which sort of evolution deck would I prefer to play right now, I would still play Espeon, but I know a lot more people probably played Flareon and Leafeon than Espeon this weekend. I will say that in the head-to-head matchup, I would probably prefer to play Espeon. Because you're playing 2 Sylveon, it's just a little bit more consistent in the overall strategy. Going second, that matchup feels free if you're playing Espeon. But anyway, that's all sort of hearsay. Leafeon, Flareon, just a good deck in general. Yeah, like I said, was well positioned here. I'm going to skip over these the Giratina and Darkrai decks because I guess we'll take a look at Eternal's Giratina Darkrai deck because maybe it's different than the other one, I guess is maybe what I'm curious about. But no, it's literally, I think, the exact same, except no, yeah, it is. It's the exact same deck. This, to me, if you're playing Giratina Darkrai, like this is the list here. I think we just kind of throw in silver, play out 1 potion, 1 PCL. I mean, you know, what are we going to say really about Giratina Darkrai? It's just taking advantage of, you know, the early format and being really hyper consistent. One thing that's really interesting though is going to be this Darkrai Silvally deck list. This deck went 8-2-1. A really, really surprising deck. Not something that I even saw or built or tested in my early, I guess, days of this format. Easy on him, B, from the United States. Let's take a look at this deck because this is one of the more creative decks, I think, in the entire game, which is Silvally with the baby Pokemon, 3 baby Pokemon in general. Again, it doesn't really matter which baby Pokemon we're playing here, so just 3 babies, Magby and Pichu. They both do the same exact thing here, but then 1 copy of Darkrai, or rather 2 copies of Darkrai. And you might be wondering, like, you know, what is Darkrai really doing in this deck list? I'll tell you, because this deck is playing Dark Energies. What happens with this deck, right, which is, again, massively underrated, is if this deck is going second and you lead with a baby Pokemon and you get Darkrai on your bench, you can actually attack turn 2 with Darkrai. It's basically the exact same thing that we were talking about with things like Arceus or Lantern, but Darkrai EX, because it has 1 colorless in its attack cost, actually can just utilize these baby Pokemon. So if you're going second, a baby's in the active, Darkrai on the bench, we attach a Dark Energy to Darkrai, dealing 20 damage, right, with the Nightmare Aura, and then we end our turn by attacking with Magby or Pichu. We accelerate a Fire or Electric Energy to Darkrai, and then on our second turn, we just attach again, and then we have free retreat into Darkrai. We've done 40 damage with Nightmare Aura, and now we're hitting for 80 damage. Like, it's actually really, really strong going second. And then again, we have Silvally because Silvally is just a really consistent, you know, strategy in the game, and we have 2 Gladion. We've got a bunch of supporter cards. We have the baby Pokemon with Silvally, so we're basically playing Turbo Silvally in its own right. It's actually a really, really smart deck, a really strong deck. I don't know how its overall performance was this weekend, but I actually expect that this is probably one of the other better ways to be playing Turbo Silvally if you're not playing Oricorio. Again, at the end of the day, like, Oricorio probably will provide more winning to you than playing this Darkrai tech here, but it's still really cool and it's actually really strong. I've been absolutely mopped on the ranked ladder by this deck list when they go second, lead a baby, and then get that Darkrai off on turn 2. Really difficult to deal with, honestly. But with Espeon, we can always just attach to the bench and then 2 it kill the active and then GG, you know what I mean? But anyway, that's beside the point. Darkrai EX with Silvally and the baby Pokemon, just a really interesting way to play Turbo Silvally that is more hyper aggression and less sort of control oriented like the Oricorio variant would be. Very fun, very interesting. Like I said, 1 silver. Silver is in all of these decks, guys. Silver is just so good. I would highly recommend playing 1 copy of Silver. I do think it's better to play 1 copy of Red card with it, but when you're playing Silvally, like you know, you need supporter cards to do the buffed damage. So I guess it makes sense to not play Red card in this list. I think Giant Cave's probably also correct as well. No Mars, just 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, 1 Leaf. Again, if we do lead Darkrai, Leaf is probably kind of needed. 2 Gladion, of course, because Silvally, 2 Research, 2 Pokeballs, so 1 Silver. Again, that all kind of makes a decent amount of sense here. After this, Moon City here from the United States was playing Giratina Darkrai. We're going to skip over his list. I know you guys probably aren't that interested in seeing Giratina Darkrai decks. Let's take a look here at the second highest placing Espeon deck, which again, impressive that 2 Espeons here were in top 12, considering how many people did play Espeon this tournament. let's take a look at this deck list and see if really anything is that different. This to me would be much more sort of in line with what I would think a traditional, Sylveon Espeon deck would look like. What's interesting here is that we're playing one Mars and one Silver, but again, we're not playing the Espeon non-EX, we're just playing the Sylveon. So again, kind of what I said before, right? We're just sort of removing one of those non-EX evolution Pokemon to play just an extra card here, and that extra card is actually going to be Eevee Bag, but instead of red card, we're playing Mars. Mars is still a very, very good card, so I'm not going to sit here and just like sort of discredit Mars, but I do think that in this deck, if we're playing Silver, I would rather play one red card and one Silver instead of one Mars, one Silver, because you can play them both on the same turn. But yeah, instead of the, Espeon EX, we're playing 2 Eevee Bag. I think that Eevee Bag is really interesting. There's some matchups where 2 Eevee Bag is actually needed in order to win, to extend and do enough damage, but some games you don't really need any Eevee Bags, so they are a really interesting card in this deck, depending on what the matchup looks like, and depending on what decks you're going up against when you're playing Espeon. Eevee Bag might not even be that needed. It really just depends on like what the format is. Most often, I'm actually using Eevee Bag to heal and to get out of different breakpoints than I am to actually deal extra damage. So I think the healing for Eevee Bag is probably still worth it for sure. But I think 2 Eevee Bag is kind of correct. 1 Giant Cape is interesting. I was playing 2 Giant Cape in this list for quite some time. But the issue with it is that, most decks are playing Guzma, and it doesn't really matter if we have 2 Giant Capes, right? Because if they have Sabrina, you're going to get KO'd anyway, or if they have Red, you're going to get KO'd anyway. If they have Guzma, you're going to get KO'd anyway. So I think just 1 Giant Cape makes sense, and then playing Silver to sort of counteract that conditional win supporter probably makes more sense to me. But I love this deck list. The only thing I would change here personally, and I'm not saying that that's objectively correct, would be to swap Mars for red card. But in general, I think that this structure of this deck is really, really strong. Like I said, you could swap the non-EX Sylveon for non-EX Espeon. I think they would both be pretty good. They both do better things in certain scenarios. Overall, it's nice to have the potential to deal a ton of damage with Sylveon, but it doesn't always really kind of come out that way. And against Oricorio, Espeon might just be a little bit more consistent. But yeah, Espeon is really, really good. I mean, it's probably like a top tier deck in my mind. It might just earn an S tier placement. In the tier list tomorrow, by the way, we are doing our tier list on Tuesday, the first tier list of this new season in the new metagame, which is going to be really, really exciting. I cannot wait for that. At 14th place here, this is the highest placing Buzzwole deck, and I think that this is a balanced Buzzwole, which I think it is, yeah. Actually, playing 1 Rescue Scarf is really, really cool. I think that Rescue Scarf and Lusamine actually works pretty well, because theoretically speaking, right, like with Celesteela, we can double pivot really easily with free retreat. So we can attach Rescue Scarf to like a Buzzwole with 3 energies, get KO'd, and then actually just Rescue Scarf, bring that Buzzwole back into our hand, and then Lusamine to it, attached to it, and now we're just attacking with the same Buzzwole back to back, which is really funny for the games where maybe we don't have a second Buzzwole. I think that's really, really fun. It's also going to be really useful for Kartana or Pheromosa if they are particularly really useful. We can kind of cycle through either of them more than once. So I think that Rescue Scarf is actually a really, really smart inclusion to Buzzwole, and even Buzzwole is playing 1 copy of Silver and 1 red card, which is really funny. Again, this combo absolutely broken. Still 1 Leaf Cape, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, 2 Lusamine, 2 Ericas. This deck list has space, which is really cool. Buzzwole, just one of the most consistent decks in the entire game. I know a lot of people are going to be wondering, what do we play against Giratina and Darkrai? Traditionally, one of the best decks in the entire game against Giratina Darkrai is going to be Buzzwole. And the other funny thing about Buzzwole is that it hard counters Crobat, right? So I know that Crobat wasn't something that did exceptionally well this tournament. A big reason for that is how many people were playing Buzzwole. Buzzwole, yes, is not only one of the best counterplays to Giratina Darkrai, but is actually probably the best deck to play against Crobat, which is interesting if people were kind of curious on how to counterplay against Crobat. So Buzzwole, really, really cool. Really strong. Actually had a really good performance this weekend, even though none of them were like super high up in the standings. A lot of them were down here in top 16, top 20, which is definitely interesting. This is Buzzwole Pheromosa. The main difference here, of course, is that we're not playing Kartana, and that's kind of the only difference with the deck here. And if we're not playing Kartana and we're playing 2 Pheromosa, it makes more sense to play 2 copies of Cyrus, and that's really the only difference with the deck. We're playing red card in Mars instead of red card Silver here, but we are playing Guzma, which I think is also fine. I think Guzma is just a really good card. So, whichever Buzzwole deck you decide to play, I think they're both really good. I think just the idea of Erica's healing, Buzzwole being able to double pivot out to remove the poison from Crobat, plus Leaf Cape. Buzzwole's just a really strong counterplay to things like Crobat, honestly. And traditionally, we just have a good Giratina Darkrai matchup. So I think Buzzwole's just a really, really strong choice there. Down here at 20th place, let's take a look at Ho-Oh and Snorlax here. Probably one of the more interesting decks that I've ever seen placed highly at Ursa Days. So this is Ho-Oh. So Ho-Oh did get some representation here. Ho-Oh here in 20th place. 2 copies of Ho-Oh, 2 copies of Snorlax EX, and then 1 copy of Giratina, 1 Kamala, and 1 Magby. So this deck list is definitely a bit of a mixed bag. It's a little bit confusing when we take a look at it, but Kamala here realistically just used as an option to KO Oricorio. 90 damage or 70 damage for 2 energies. We're going to get that KO. And again, we do have Ilima and Lyra, so we can kind of retreat these Pokemon if they take damage from the bench. We are also playing Sabrina, Cyrus, Giant Cape, Red Card, Silver. There's the Red Card, Silver combination. And like I said, 1 Lyra, 1 Ilima. So I think that the whole point of Snorlax here is not only can we set it up with Ho-Oh's, Phoenix Turbo, right? We can get, Snorlax fully set up here, but as a leadoff option, it's actually not that bad because we can basically just stall. So that's another lineup here. If we do lead Snorlax, we can kind of attach manually to Ho-Oh. I don't know what energy types they're playing in this deck. Probably Psychic, actually. I don't think it really matters. I think you would probably just rather play Psychic energies with this deck, which is really funny because then we can double up on Giratina if we need to, if it's in the active spot. Really high upside here, but yeah, Snorlax as a leadoff can be basically a tank while we either double attach to Giratina or we just attach to Ho-Oh and then Broken Space Bellow. We can bring Snorlax back up with Ilima or bring it back into our bench here with Lyra, which is again really strong. Ho-Oh sets up Snorlax. It also can just do 80 damage and set up a second Ho-Oh, which is pretty funny. Magby as well as a leadoff option to accelerate those energies to Ho-Oh while we, I guess we can't Broken Space Bellow while we do that, but it's just another leadoff option. A really fun deck, just a really interesting deck list. Not something that I really ever expected, but what I did expect, honestly, and I said this like a couple of days ago, that Ho-Oh was probably best paired with Giratina because it's a colorless Pokemon, because Giratina, it's sort of like Giratina Darkrai in that sense, where we're just attaching to Ho-Oh while we Broken Space Bellow. This time we can actually play Psychic Energy, so it's a little bit more like Mewtwo Giratina from back in the day, but Ho-Oh itself doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does accelerate more energies to then go into Snorlax, which again, is all really interesting stuff. Double Giant Cape, a really fun deck. Honestly, probably the best way to play Ho-Oh right now, which I think is really, really cool. We could play in place of Snorlax something like an Arceus EX for more consistent damage turn after turn, but in general, we're playing 1 Pokemon Center Lady, so we can heal the sleep off of Snorlax and attack turn after turn. And Snorlax does have 20 more HP than Arceus, so there you go, guys. I mean, it also heals while it's in the active spot. It heals 20 damage. A really effective sort of tank Pokemon while we sort of ramp up. A really fun deck. Probably one of my favorite decks from this tournament. If you did want to play something really spicy, and if you did have 2 copies of Ho-Oh, honestly, this is probably your best bet right now. I think that Lugia is interesting, but when we're playing a deck like with Arceus or Snorlax as opposed to Lugia, we can afford to play Psychic Energies and Giratina, which is probably a much bigger upside, honestly, than playing Lugia in general, you know what I mean? So very, very fun deck, very, very cool. If anybody has some more info about this, comment down below. I would love to hear your opinions on it. If we go down here, let's take a look at the highest placing Crobat deck, because yes, we did, of course, talk a little bit about Crobat in the upcoming days. And no, I'm not going to sit here and say that I was wrong about Crobat. Crobat is an exceptionally strong deck, one of the strongest decks that came out of A4. In fact, I would say it's probably the strongest new archetype that came out of this format. The thing about Crobat, realistically, is that for whatever the reason, I think the hype around it led to more people counterplaying Crobat this opening weekend than any other deck, which is really funny when you consider that Crobat never really had the chance to kind of pop off, right? Buzzwole, really strong into Crobat. Giratina Darkrai definitely can do well into Crobat. And then, of course, we're playing, a lot of people were playing those Donphan fighting decks, those aggro, fighting decks, which Crobat's going to really struggle against. I think that Crobat and Oricorio as well, which that matchup isn't necessarily, impossible for Crobat, but it's not, the best matchup in the whole world. I just think that Crobat came into a metagame that was very unfriendly to Crobat, which again, people are going to say, well, if a deck is really not well positioned, is it a strong deck? Well, inherently, there's a difference there, right? A deck can be one of the strongest decks in the game, but if everyone is playing decks that are strong against it, then it's not, one of the strongest choices. So I think that Crobat will eventually end up being a really strong option at some point in Pokemon Pocket. It's just a really good deck list. It is. We're playing the Sylveon, 1 energy attack cost. We have the Poison. We have the Darkrai. We're playing Silver, some hand disruption here. Sabrina, Cyrus, Giant Cape. This is one of the few decks that, again, hard walls Espeon, which, I would love to see Crobat fade out of the metagame and allow us to play more Espeon. But yeah, I think that Crobat this weekend, it wasn't one of the most played decks, but it was certainly, it saw a decent amount of play. just not a friendly meta this opening weekend for Crobat, which again is probably kind of funny because it never really got the opportunity to fully pop off. And Espeon kind of filled its place there as a deck that was pretty good against a lot of the decks that saw play it this weekend. So anyway, guys, this is Crobat, and honestly, I think this deck list here is pretty correct. You could play, again, you could swap out Mars for red card because we are playing silver. There's some merit to that. One Sabrina Cyrus, I think, is correct here. We're playing the 2-2 Find a Friend, Eevee and Sylveon. One Darkrai, I will say Darkrai is just better than Nihilego. I didn't expect that, but again, maybe it's Nihilego's better for the Oricorio matchup, but I don't know if that matchup is that poor for us anyway. So I would rather just play Darkrai personally. Also, like, you know, eventually we can just attack with Darkrai. That's a very interesting win condition for Crobat. Yeah, I mean, that's really my opinions about it. Like, we've talked about Crobat a lot, honestly, in the last few days. It's a really, really strong deck. Maybe not the best time to be playing it right now. Maybe sometime people will forget about Crobat and we can kind of come back and we can get back in here and do fun Crobat stuff. But yeah, for now, just probably not a great way to play it. Like I said, or not a great time rather to play Crobat. But a really, really strong deck list. Next up here at 23rd place, we have Arceus and Tapu Koko. What's really cool about this tournament and opening weekend is that we're getting a really big balance of deck lists. I think that A4 will probably be, like, this season will likely be the most spread out that we've ever had in Pokemon Pocket. I think that there's just so many strong decks, and some are going to have better matchups against others. Like, of course, that's sort of how it works, but as far as like the total quantity of quality strong decks right now, there's more than there ever has been, which honestly, I think is really good for the game. Here is Turbo Lightning, but instead of Silvally, we're just playing Tapu Koko Arceus. It has its upsides, it has its downsides. The cool thing about Tapu Koko and Zeraora is that we can utilize Electrical Cord, which is a really strong card. Again, one silver, one red card, guys, is going to be here a lot. One Giovanni, one Cyrus, one Sabrina, and then two Elemental Switch. So again, that's what this deck is really all about. Hyper aggression, really relying on the energy conservation with Electrical Cord. Oricorio is going to win some games. Zeraora is aggro. Tapu Koko's aggro. Arceus is a really decent tempo attacker. It's a really good deck, a really, really strong deck. The only downside here is, of course, that our only counterplay to something like Silvally or Oricorio, or I guess Oricorio in general, is Oricorio and Zeraora, which neither can one-hit KO an Oricorio, which is kind of tough for sure. But Arceus can one-hit KO Silvally, and I think that's definitely a pretty big upside. Tapu Koko really strong going second. I really like this deck. I think I talked about it a couple of days ago, and I said that, you know, Tapu Koko Arceus, like this version of Turbo Lightning is really good, but it will never see more play than Silvally. And I don't think it'll ever really get its flowers just because more people are going to play the Silvally Lightning variant than Arceus and Tapu Koko, but still really, really strong. Honestly, one of my favorite decks in the entire game. One of the better decks also to play right now. Just wasn't something that really saw much play whatsoever. But yeah, anyway, there it is. What's next here? If we go down here, is there anything that we missed? Oh, I guess we missed Charizard. I don't think we ever talked about Charizard. So let's go back up to 16th place where there was one Charizard. So what's funny here, and I did say it a couple days ago, not many people played Charizard. And I don't know necessarily why that is, because if you look, again, if you look at all of the decks that saw the most play this weekend, Charizard was probably the #1 option to counterplay those decks, right? Giratina Darkrai, Buzzwole, you know, I guess Silvally or Oricorio. I guess Oricorio is probably the main downside if you're playing Charizard right now. I'll be honest. Oricorio is definitely not something that Charizard loves to run into, but Giratina Darkrai and Buzzwole, really, really good, or bad, rather, into Charizard. And I think that Charizard's still really strong. I think people just sort of either shied away from playing Charizard in favor of maybe playing Buzzwole Giratina. Maybe they were a bit scared of Squirt Bottle, even though nobody ever played Squirt Bottle. I guess it does technically hard counter Charizard, but yeah, not many people played it this weekend. I do expect Charizard to still be one of the strongest decks in the entire game. Crobat did release, so I think maybe some people just sort of swapped over to Crobat, but maybe Charizard just ended up being a better option this weekend. I don't know what the win rate was like for Charizard, but not many people played it. I know that as a fact. But I still think Charizard is a top deck in the metagame right now, and in general, probably one of the stronger decks. It is something that gets sort of counterplayed by more aggressive archetypes, and of course, our Oricorio is definitely a downside, so I would say that's the only thing holding Charizard back is truthfully probably just Silvally or Oricorio. That matchup's always going to be a little bit annoying for sure. It is winnable, 100% winnable. Charizard Definitely has been buffed by Find a Friend Eevee for sure, and a lot of these Evolution decks or Sylveon decks have been. But yeah, I mean, it's Charizard. It'll probably rise back up and play as time goes on, but for right now, just not many people played it this weekend. Maybe they were sick of it from last format. I wouldn't be shocked to see that. Let's take a look at the Silvally deck. which is very similar to the Darkrai deck, but this is kind of a mix, right? So this is basically like Turbo Savali. Did we already take a look at this? We might have already taken a look at this deck, but they were playing 1 Pichu, 1 Magby. I think we did, actually. So it's the same list. This is just an example. You can play just 2 Pichu. You could play 2 Magby. It really wouldn't matter. You're just playing Lightning Energies for the deck list, and it's just sort of another way to play hyper-aggressive sort of Turbo Savali with Oricorio. It actually works really well. Really, really strong deck list. I don't know if more people will play this than Zeraora. Maybe when more people get baby Pokemon. I actually am a little bit more leaning on this being the better option just because it's stronger going first. But in general, really, really interesting for sure. Turbo Savali, definitely just one of the better Pokemon, one of the better decks in the entire game. And that's kind of it. I guess if we go all the way down here to 39th place, like I said, we can talk a little bit about Greninja, Sylveon, and Giratina. Just really not that strong of an option. It's hard to really say why. One thing is for sure is that Giratina Darkrai has actually always had a winning matchup against this deck list, which is probably a big downside to it this weekend. I think that Buzzwole also probably does fairly decent into this deck list. Things like Crobat, probably also pretty good. Espeon is certainly something that really does not mind playing this deck list whatsoever. We're just going to heal all of the damage off with Greninja and with a Giant Cape. Unless you're playing Guzma or Red, you literally can never one-hit KO an Espeon or a Sylveon, which is going to mean you're going to lose the game. So I would say that the format right now is not very kind to Greninja, Sylveon, and Giratina, which is really interesting. Probably the biggest difference and the biggest change between formats is this deck list and how it probably won't see as much play nearly as it did last format. But anyway, guys, there you go. Oh, we forgot Skarmory. 32nd place here, Skarmory EX, guys. Boom. This is actually 17 trainer Skarmory, and I actually think that Skarmory is a totally fine deck. I don't know if it's going to ever be like top tier, but it's certainly not bad at all. One thing I will say is that you basically auto lose 2 Espeon, so if Espeon sees a lot of play, you're just going to lose. If anybody's curious about that, Espeon can heal 60 damage every turn the entire game, effectively, and Skarmory can only negate damage for a number of turns based on how many supporter cards we have. So eventually, you're just going to get outpaced by Espeon, and that's just sort of the reality of it. I mean, there's nothing else that we can say. Espeon just sort of wins the head-to-head matchup here, which feels bad, but, I mean, Skarmory isn't a bad Pokemon, like, whatsoever. It's really not bad. This Skarmory here is going to allow us to maybe KO baby Pokemon. I've seen this deck see play instead of the small Skarmory. It was playing Magearna. I don't really know which one's better. I haven't tested Skarmory that much, but Skarmory EX is not bad. Tons of metal support with Steel Apron and Jasmine and Adamant, which is pretty cool. Just tons of supporter cards that we can play in here. A lot of disruption as well, which I think is definitely really cool. So, you know, shout out to Skarmory. I mean, let's go. 7-3 Roderick. Where's Roderick here from Puerto Rico, repping Skarmory. So shout out to him. And shout out to really everybody in this tournament. Listen, big respect to all of the people who played new decks and really tried to push the boundaries and really kind of move the meta forward. I'm not disrespecting anybody that played Giratina Darkrai or Buzzwole or Oricorio in this tournament. Winning is important, so, you know, shout out to you for trying to win. But, you know, definitely respectful to all of the players who did play new cards and new decks to really kind of try to evolve the meta further. I think that, you know, I don't want people to overreact to the results this weekend. Is Giratina Darkrai a strong deck? Yes, but again, people now have their sights set on Giratina Darkrai. People will be counterplaying it. People will be sort of trying to take advantage of that matchup because it is going to be really popular. And again, by the time we're going into like week 3 of this format, everything will be pretty settled, and we're going to have a super diverse metagame. I think that so many decks are strong in the game right now. It really just comes down to a deck really seeing success and seeing popularity. I will say that I do expect Oricorio to see more play. I expect Flareon and Leafeon to maybe jump and play. Giratina Darkrai is certainly going to see a ton of play. And hopefully Espeon really does catch on because I think it's a really strong option. So a really fun tournament this weekend. Really, really fun results. To end this video, we're going to go into the metagame tab. So again, we do this. I know a lot of people probably tune out of the video at this point, but realistically speaking, this is sort of where you're going to provide or get all of your context. And I think that this is, for all the people that stay tuned for this part of the video, you're going to have definitely a pretty big advantage when it comes to like understanding kind of what's going on with the metagame. So let's dive right into it. I said this would be a long video, and it is. So here you go. These are the most played decks of this weekend, right? So this, in terms of like the meta shares, this was what was popular, which is, again, really interesting data to take a look at. Giratina Darkrai, almost 10% of the meta share, the #1 most played deck. Again, guys, A4 released just a few days ago. This is the first tournament of a new expansion, and Giratina Darkrai was the most played deck. So again, people know what's going on at this point. They understand, oh, new cards come out, let's play Giratina Darkrai, let's farm a bunch of suboptimal deck lists. Like, that's how it goes. A 54% win rate with 10% meta share, definitely impressive. Like I said, it was probably feasting on a bunch of really bad decks and rad cards that a lot of people were playing because things were new, right? And that's really where Giratina Darkrai shines, is it kind of walls out anything that's not really a strong meta deck. Second place here is Buzzwole, which actually had an even higher win rate at 55.5% and 9.3% of the meta share here. Buzzwole Pheromosa, a really strong option here. Good into a lot of decks. It's good into Giratina Darkrai. It's good into Silvally or Oricorio. It's good into Crobat Sylveon. Buzzwole might have been actually the best meta call of this weekend, even though not many people, I guess, were in like top 8 with Buzzwole. It did actually extremely well, as we see by the actual data here. Really, really strong performances here. Silvally or Oricorio was just above 50%, or I guess 50% technically, 192 to 184. Also 8% of the meta share. 69 people played it. Nice. So what's going on here with Silvally or Oricorio? What we're seeing is basically all of these Oricorio decks being split up into a lot of different categories onto Limitless. If we scroll down here, again, 69 people playing standard Silvally or Oricorio, but if we go down here, 24 people playing Silvally Pichu, again, also 50% here, and then Tapu Koko Arceus, which is also an Oricorio archetype, also had 20 people playing it. If we go down here, there's probably more here. Dragonite Pichu, I guess that's different, but Tapu Koko Arceus, maybe this is a different deck for some reason, I don't know. Arceus Pichu, again, 6 people playing it. So a lot of Oricorio decks, but it's split up into multiple different sort of, categories, which, I think is probably somewhat interesting. I see here on the screen that my screen is kind of bugging for whatever reason. I don't know what's going on here. I just noticed that. So let me try to fix this. Okay, give me 1 second. All right, we're back. We fixed the thing going on the screen there. I don't know exactly what was going on, so I apologize for that. But anyway, what were we talking about? Yeah, Silvally or Oricorio. 50% win rate, kind of across the board, but honestly, still one of the stronger decks. Definitely a pretty good choice, and a lot of people did play it when you add up all of the different archetypes. Crobat and Sylveon here, the fourth most played deck, 7% of the meta share, and it struggled a bit, about a 46% win rate, 129 to 149. Again, like I said, a lot of people counterplaying Crobat for whatever the reason. It never really had the opportunity to come in and prove itself, but absolutely crazy that Silvally or Oricorio, Buzzwole, and Giratina Darkrai all saw more play than, Crobat, which was sort of the new most hyped up deck. So again, don't over-exaggerate Crobat here. It's still really strong. You have to respect it. But again, if people are going to continue to play Darktina, Buzzwole, and Oricorio, like, you're probably going to be like, it's not going to have a chance to really take over, which is fine. And I'm not saying it has to, but definitely sort of hard counterplayed immediately here. The fifth most played deck was Sylveon and Greninja, about a 5.5% meta share here, 47% win rate. So it did struggle quite a little bit here. Nothing super impressive or too crazy about Greninja, but again, it's something that I don't think is as well positioned as it was before. Charizard here, the sixth most played deck here, 40 people played it. 87 to 116, 43% win rate. That is amongst the lowest, really, out of all of these deck lists. I think a big reason for that probably is that Crobat's pacing probably made it a good matchup against Charizard. But again, tons of Oricorio, and Oricorio really is a deck that beats Charizard oftentimes, one of the more popular cards to kind of just counter Charizard. And then here's Espeon. So finally, yes, Espeon here, only 4% of the meta share, but 130 to 88. So that's a 58 almost percent win rate, the highest win rate out of any of these decks here. So yes, Espeon and Sylveon did make it to the grand finals, being the 6th most played deck or 7th most played deck, which is impressive, but definitely had the highest win rate. This is the deck that I'm looking out for right now. Again, Crobat's going to decline in play. Giratina Darkrai might rise in play, but I still think Espeon is probably one of the best, if not the best positioned or best deck, new deck to play right now in the format. And again, Flareon, Leafeon, really decent performance this week, 76 and 61, only 3% of the meta share. Look how spread out this is. Like, look at all of these deck lists that saw, shout out to Matt Cargo, bro. 12 people played Matt Cargo, and they won 36% of their games, which is a bit rough, I'm not gonna lie. I tried to tell you not to play Matt Cargo, but anyway. Baby Pokemon with Oricorio or Silvally here, also 50% win rate, a decent deck list here. Darkrai Silvally, so that sort of aggro Silvally deck that was playing Darkrai instead of Oricorio, only a 44% win rate, so it didn't do that well overall. Tapu Koko Arceus with just about a 50% win rate, and then Donphan, if we go down here, Donphan with Lucario was a 40% win rate, 32 and 47. It kind of struggled, but Donphan and Rampardos did kind of a lot better, 32 and 35 here, 47.7% win rate. Definitely not bad whatsoever. Here's Guzzlord and Naganadel, which actually wasn't even that, didn't do that well across the entire format of this tournament, about a 50% win rate, but one of them did make it into top 8, which is pretty cool. And if we go down here, let's see. So that Umbreon Sylveon deck that some people were playing, I never was really high on it. It went 23 and 26. 9 people played it, not super great. Here's Solgaleo. So not many people playing Solgaleo right now, for whatever the reason, and it did do quite poorly, 13 and 24. So maybe Solgaleo's cooked right now. I don't really know exactly what's going on there. But RIP to Solgaleo, maybe. Snorlax and Ho-Oh. So this was a deck that actually a few people played. 18 and 15 did pretty good here. Arceus and baby Pokemon did pretty good. So Turbo Arceus did pretty decent. And yeah, I mean, just a lot of different decks, right? So early on in the format, like nothing is super dominant in terms of the meta share, right? I mean, a lot of these decks are new decks, people testing out new cards. It's going to inflate the win rates of some of these decks up at the top here, like we see with Giratina, Darkrai, and Buzzwole. Next week, I expect a lot of people to play, decks that are a bit more refined, right? People are going to have more cards. They're going to play things that are a bit more tried and tested, proven. Things are just going to change, realistically, is what's going to happen. And I think that's going to open up the space for a lot of other decks down here to do a lot better. And it's probably going to even things out in terms of win rates and remove probably some few points from Giratina, Darkrai, and things like Buzzwole. But yeah, anyway, let's take a look at the day 2 conversion rates. These are always really fun to take a look at. It really just showcases which decks did well in day 1. And then the win rates in day 2 showcase which decks did well in day 2. So anyway, here you go. Giratina, Darkrai, and Buzzwole definitely all had really significant jumps, as well as Savali or Ikorio. So this Giratina, Darkrai jumped up to 1/4 of day 2 and went 19 and 5 or 19 and 15. So a really decent record there. Buzzwole went 5 and 10, so it struggled in day 2. But a lot of Buzzwole did make it into day 2. Savali or Ikorio went 7 and 9 as well, so it didn't do that well. But 9 players, 14% of day 2 were playing it. Sylveon and Espeon, so basically doubled in meta share, so it did really well in day 1. And also went 7 and 5 in day 2. So again, really decent performance for Espeon and Sylveon. Crobat struggled in day 2 as well as in day 1. And yeah, that's kind of all we're seeing here. The main standouts here are the Savali Zero Aura that went 4 and 1. Let's see here. What was it? The Snorlax Ho-Oh. I guess it went 1 and 1. But anyway, still impressive for sure. So that's sort of the day 2 metrics. This is what the day 2 metagame looked like. Definitely going to look a lot different, I would expect, next weekend. And I think that I'll be shocked. I'll just say it. If Giratina, Darkrai wins next weekend, I will also be very surprised. So we'll see. I mean, I would be surprised, but also not at the same time. Hopefully this video was interesting to you guys. The first meta reports of new seasons are always really fun. That's why this video was so long. So I do kind of apologize for dragging on, but there's a lot to talk about. And this is sort of where we do it. Tomorrow's video is also going to be long. It's going to be our tier list. So I know some people are kind of curious, like what's the difference between, the Meta Monday and you take a look at the standings and the tier list on Tuesday. The difference is like, I'm not ranking decks based around their performance in day 1. I'm ranking their tiers on the tier list based on how well I think they're going to be doing in next week, which is a very, very different thing to do, right? So it's sort of a predictive look at the next week of competitive play. You're going to want to stay tuned for the tier list because I think it's going to be really, really fun and it's going to be really interesting. And I know there's going to be some hot takes thrown in there, so I just cannot wait to get to the tier list, guys. But anyway, let's wrap it up. So don't forget to comment down below what you guys thought of this tournament. What did you guys think of the results? Hopefully this video was useful and interesting to you guys. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thanks again for 30,000 subscribers. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow. And yeah, that's it. I don't have anything else to say. Peace out.